welcome to another FACEHAMMER Advent show, and today we're going to talk things Behemoth, or Behemoth, however you want to say it, monstrous and awesome, and how to keep your loved ones safe.
Yeah, how to keep your babies alive. It's an important one. I got a bit of dust in my eye. I'm not crying at the thought of the amount of monsters that I've lost on the field.
How to protect the big guys.
It
and
is important
Yeah.
to protect the big guys, though. Absolutely do. And I think there's probably some very obvious ways that we're going to cover here, and then there's some ways that perhaps people wouldn't think of, or there's ways to some of the obvious ways. There's some nuances that I think are really important. So I'm sure we've all got our own different ideas of how we've done it. But I'm just going to rocket through the list I've got, and then you can jump in with your ways. Russ in particular has played. Well, I mean, Les has been Mr. Stardrake for a couple of years.
Yeah, it's only 130 games for that list, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Russ has been Mr. Vlost, which is Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon since day dot.
Black.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is Arcan a big guy?
Yeah.
I mean, he's on a.
Technically, I think
just
he's
ask his
got
mount. Just ask his mount.
He looks.
Just
He's
ask
not
his
a big
mount.
guy, is he?
He's got a monstrous
look at
profile.
Arcan.
He's got the Behemoth keyword.
Yeah, he's still bullshit.
He's as big as his hat, mate. He's as big as his hat. Larger than life.
That is fair. He does have a good hat.
He does has a stupid hat. Definitely.
So the first thing that I've got written down is screens. That one is incredibly obvious, but I think there's some pretty important parts to this which people often forget, and I imagine that all of us in this call have managed to exploit it when people haven't got it right. So things to be aware of when you're putting a screen in front of your monster. People charging that screen with two things, wiping it out with one, and then just killing your monster with the other. That is definitely a thing. So if your opponent has a way to get to you super fast, and they've got, I don't know, there's a second wave to it, they've got a monster, then a cavalry, or they've got some shooting or whatever, you might need to put down two. Or you might need to use distance between the screens. We'll come to distance in a second. The other thing is, be really careful about 3 inches. Like everyone's got a combat gauge or something 3 inches long. So you
don't want to whack them on the table though.
No.
The combat gauge should be readily available.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So grab your combat gauge and put it down. And when you're measuring this, because it does matter, don't just be like, oh, the front of that guy's base is exactly 3 inches away. Exactly 3 inches often doesn't cut it. And if your guys are blah 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 blah, someone can often, especially if they've got an oval, sneak into one of those little dinks, and they're going to be like not even within question. It's not like, oh, that's 2.9 a bit. They're going to be like nearly 2.5 inches away rather than 3. It can happen super easily, especially if you've been sloppy with your distancing.
Yeah,
in which
and
case
also
you're
bad
twice over.
piling etiquette as well. Like people don't do it on purpose, but if someone's pushing their models in and then they nudge your models because everything's not like a solid, it's not like they're magnetized. That if you're 3.1 away and they pile in their models, and then all of a sudden they're in range. So it's something that Byron said. It's just like, if you want to be outside of 3 inches,
make sure it is.
Be outside of 3 inches. Like,
and
make
tell your
sure
opponent.
You're outside
It's a good, it's a good idea to, when you're in your movement phase, is to measure it like in front of your opponent and say, look, just so that's more than 3, right? I think,
your intention.
They confirm it.
But
also, it's like, be aware that you might want to be within 3 as well.
That's the other one. You could be sneaky.
I think one of the things that you need to look out for if you're using a screen, and it's something that I've caught people out of before, is you can pile in when you charge, not necessarily need to be within 3. So if you've got a screen, what you can do is charge it with 2 things. One thing kills the screen, the other thing piles in 3 and has a reach. So even if you're 4 away or 5 away, or sometimes even 6 away, you can still actually be grabbed. So I would say that just be aware that distance, depending on what you want to do. Now, one of the things you talked about, like screens, and people probably imagine like a line of crappy infantry or something in a way. One of the things I use to screen is another monster or a mortis engine, because basically when you think about the potential attacks that can come into your monster, you've got the circumference of the base and the reach of the enemy models. So if you block that with another monster, you're cutting out space that they could hit your other thing. And that doesn't have to be a screen of crap infantry. It could be a terribly resilient second monster, or like I use Mortis Engine for great effect for that, because you're just stopping the number of dice being rolled that could potentially one-shot you. basically.
Or funnel it right. So if
Yeah.
you've got a monster and you've got, like, for instance, a Stardrakes on an oval, you put the point of the oval facing forwards, and then you have 2 units along in front of that point of that oval. So if an enemy wants to go into the Stardrake, they're going to get tripled, like, as Byron said, but they also have to funnel into that point. They can't encircle the model. They have to, so then it limits the amount of models. Instead of them putting their 30 guys onto the Stardrake, realistically they're only going to get 7 or 10, because the rest of the models do a job whilst not screening the model. It limits the amount of attacks. And it's one of the things that you need to think about when you're actually positioning your model outside of the screen as well, like at later parts of the game. It's just like, if I go there, am I leaving my entire side open for somebody to charge it? Whereas because I deliver all of my attacks from a model that size from wherever I want to on that base. So it's positioning of how you want, like, where you want that to be. And also it's a good way of blocking, to completely on a tangent, it's a good way of sort of funneling people, because they have to be 3 inches away from you if you're in combat. So I used to use the Stardrake itself as a screen. So it'd be like, I'm going to tag that unit there. For you to go round the Stardrake, you need to be outside of 3, and it's a big base, so you have to circle around it again. So don't be afraid to screen with your monsters, as Russ said.
Yeah, really good point. And of course, like Les said, if you've got an oval base, there's a massive amount of flexibility. It's up to you how you put that down on the table. So use it to your advantage. It doesn't have to be facing forwards where it's faces. The next one's items, which that's a fairly obvious one. But there are there's some niche stuff here. There's also skills, abilities, command traits, blah blah blah. And it does fit in with screening. So sometimes you could have a monster that is like fairly resilient, and if you stood next to someone with a -1 to hit aura, suddenly he's incredibly resilient. Or you stood next to someone with a +1 to armor save aura, Les. So like staunch defender, that type of thing.
Yeah.
That is a brilliant way to protect your monsters, and it doesn't even involve the monster itself. He could be within 15 inches of Neferata with a command ability up, or something like that. Ethereal spells, the works. There are some sneaky ones that you can use to, if you take damage, teleport elsewhere in OBR and stuff like that. There is a massive selection of it. But when you're writing your list, just bear in mind that something that perhaps you maybe wouldn't have considered, I don't know, that it's no good on the wizard itself. Maybe you take it just for the chance that you can put it onto your other scary monster and double its survivability. Healing fits in with that as well. So bearing in mind your distances and ranges, not only for screening, but for buffing, repairing, all that stuff. It's about considering things the turn before they happen, generally, I think.
Yeah, definitely. What was your other point? Sorry.
Yeah, so you said the first one was, you said about screen. Second point was items.
So screen, items, and then I've got distance. And then that's a really, really broad one. That means where you deploy. That means your opponent's threat ranges. Start of every game, we'll never stop banging on about this, guys, so you may as well get used to it. Ask your opponent what their army does, what you need to be worried about. Like, okay, well, that catapult's got a 36-inch reach and a 4-inch move, but oh yeah, you can spend a relentless discipline and get it to move 3 inches more. That type of thing. It's really important to know. So don't put something half an inch, don't just blob it down on the 12-inch line and then end up half an inch within range of something that's got a 1 in 6 chance of doing 6 mortal wounds to you or something like that.
There's nothing more frustrating than just being like just within range of something that you didn't need to be in range of.
Yeah, exactly.
That you could have. It's what's the term, isn't it? Back in the day, you don't want to get dieseled where you give him a double 6 charge, because if you give somebody multiple double 6 charges, they're going to get one, and then it's difficult, right?
The best defense is just not being hit by it, right?
Right.
So it's just like if they've got a 36-inch range and you set up 36.5 inches away, you're immune to that damage because they physically can't hit you with it. So whereas you could go, I've got this re-rollable save and I put my Mystic Shield on or whatever, and you go, well, actually, you just don't need to be stood there. So why are you stood there? So
don't need to use your fate dice if you don't get hit. Solid.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, one thing I would say about distance as well, and it's something that I think it's more against monsters as well, but their bases are big, right? So if you're finding it sort of a massive base, a lot of people are like, I need to set up a screen 3 inches away. So actually, you can set the screen 9 inches away, and the space between the two screens isn't big enough for them to actually fit over the top. And if they're 3 away from your screen, they're not going to be within 12 of your big guy if they roll a double 6 charge. So you just basically set like 10 inches forward. they can't land the other side of your screen and hit your monster because they can't charge the thing behind, and they can't actually physically get the space for the base. Doesn't fill that void, or you physically can't fly it into that space because it's not enough space there. So like denial of space is massive in Age of Sigmar. So
particularly with like if you're like Russ said, like the denial of space thing, if you're playing against people that have got a souped up Archeon that they want to throw into you, or any other monster, if like they're pushing a big monster around, or even like a big unit, they can't get into you if you don't give them the space. Like Archeon can't come and kill like your Stardrake if he can't fit his base between the screen unit, because his base is so massive. It'd be like, well, where'd you land? Yeah, but a canny player will then funnel Archeon in the place. Like he'll give you the one spot that he wants that Archeon can land in, knowing full well that puts Archeon in a position where you get to countercharge after the fact because you funneled him into that spot. You like the guy you're playing goes, right, I'm going to land my big monster there or my unit there to kill your threat. But somebody will set that up and go, your threat is there, so that I can countercharge you in my turn.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Russ has hit the nail on the head. It is probably one of the most technical things in all of Age of Sigmar, I would say, stuff like this, because you have to consider what like potentially pointless things in your army, what they're doing in terms of denial for your opponent, not this turn but next turn. So I've drawn an amazing diagram behind me. That's a monster. That's your screen. Let's say this gap is 6 inches. You could just have a wizard here and a wizard here. And that means that your opponent cannot land anything in all of this. And your screen can actually end up being really, really far away from your monster in that case. So those wizards aren't going to get touched because they're more than 3 inches back from the screen. And that leaves this, because of it, you add together bases plus 3 inch circumferences, it actually adds up to a huge amount of the board. So
if you put two more dots behind that monster, and put two dots either side of it, that is how I deploy most of the times. So I'd have 2 units of Fulminators on either side of the flank. That would be my screen of Liberators with Adjudicators behind, 2 Wizards in front. 2 Heraldor and stuff like that there. That would be how I'd set up my old Stormcast list, but for that very reason.
I think as well you can do something where you put a screen, you put 2 units like this, and your monster's in the middle. And what it means is that this distance between the 2 units is like 5 inches. To be 3 away, they're going to be up here, and the distance between here and here is a lot longer. So I'm doing a gesture, but you can see that you don't necessarily need your screen directly in front of what you're trying to screen. You can spread them out, and that gives you a bigger area of denied space. Particularly because their base has got to fit through that gap as well, so it could be even bigger. If you're trying to block Archeon, you could have an 11-inch gap between those 2, and he still can't fit down the middle of it because he's massive. So it's I think it's 10 inches would be the max for that, but it's really good to use that sort of mentality.
Absolutely. So the next point I've got is distraction, and this is again, it sounds incredibly obvious, but the ways that can come into play in a game are they're really, really varied. But just making your opponent worried about something else, or having a catapult or whatever. Russ is really good at this when he writes his list. He'll have something there, and it's not there for its primary purpose. It's there because it's going to stop people worrying about this thing. You can do this with target saturation. There's often the rule of 3 with monsters. Like, people can deal with 1, they can deal with 1, they can deal with 2, and then they might get absolutely ruined by 3, just because they don't have enough ways to. They've got ways to be able to deal with 1 large threat, and then they could focus some other stuff on a second one. And if you push all 3 at them at the same time, they could be absolutely ruined, even though their army is good at taking out, let's say, whatever it is, giants, gargants, great unclean ones, whatever. The moment you have multiples, it's really, really difficult. So having things with long range is often a really good idea with a monster, whatever it is, whether it's a spell or a catapult or some bow hunters, adjudicators, whatever it is, that is going to keep people further away from you. And you might not need a screen because they don't want to send in their unit of squishy things to get mullered.
It's I do think the distraction thing works really well a lot of the time. I used to, again, referring back to the old sort of Stormcast list I used to run, it would always be the Stardrake would do the heavy lifted on units because it was it kills infantry quite well. And I would use the Fulminators to bully people. They'd both be on the flanks. They'd be the distraction because they knew that everyone would be like, oh my god, they're damage free on the charge. But they don't realise that the fulminators aren't going to be doing the charging.
Standing there for a game.
Yeah, they're going to be there until the Star Drake pins that unit, and then the fulminators will deliver their charges on the corners after they've cleaned up the rest of the field. And yeah, it's like, oh, I push them forward aggressively, like either side, and people are like, oh my god, deal with that. And then the Star Drake goes into them and pins them, because it was obviously, with the combo I was using back in the day, it was just not unkillable unless you had more wounds. So yeah.
Exactly. Distraction comes in many guises in Age of Sigmar. So it could just be that you distracted them by telling them that your threat range, if you get that extra move spell off, is 30 inches. Therefore, they deploy 30 inches away. You're safe then.
Run in charge. Run in charge with the Rador. It's just, it's one of those things, isn't it, where you just go like, so I've got like a threat range of this, so then they're like, oh, if you can potentially move 24 inches and charge me, then I need to be outside of that range. And then that's, again, it's sort of like a bit cloaks and mirrorsy, but it's I do think that it's a definite thing that you need to do, or like stack your flank heavily, and then they go, well, you can go and kill the monster, but the rest of the armor's over here, so you're distracting it that way as well. So you go, this is going to do the heavy lifting, you can kill the monster, this will come and take the rest of your army off because you can't split. So I don't know, it's a difficult one.
It is, but that's it really. The next one I had was spells. We've kind of covered that, so just beware of your ranges. Don't put your guy, if it's wholly within, don't have him 18.5 inches away. Bear those things in mind, and that'll help you when you're keeping your big dudes alive, which is important.
And be aware as well, like when you're playing with a monster and you rely on a spell to protect it, if they don't get the spell off, don't try and force the issue. Like, I've played so many people with Allarelle and this is back in the old days when it was +1 save, I think, but they didn't get Mystic Shield off, but they still just pushed her into your army, and you're like, what?
Behave exactly the same.
It's probably the prime example of this is Unholy Vitality with Flesh Eaters. If you don't get Chalice or Unholy Vitality off, just wait a turn. Like, it's a 5-turn game. If you lose your monster on turn 2, and I see people talk about it with Mawcrushers. Oh, I lost my Mawcrusher on the first turn. I said, what did you do? Well, I ward it, teleported it, and charged on the first turn into the middle of their army on its own, and it died. Right? Yeah. Well, yeah, that's why it died. Like, don't do that. Yeah. So you can protect stuff with items and that, but spells, and there are other spells that can protect you that are debuffs to the opponents. They're not necessarily buffs to you, but they're debuffs to the thing that can kill your monster. So, if it's a -1 to hit or a -1 to wound, or it's even stop some charging. Or
Palisade or something.
And like endless spells like Prismatic Palisade we've talked a lot about with like Teclis and things like that, that these are ways to protect, and like for me, if you're relying on magic to protect you, and again it comes to distance and it comes to that deployment, is don't deploy an unbind range if you need that spell to go off. And if your little wizard can sit at the back and cast Palisade reliably, you don't need the big monstrous character to be the one that's casting it, so you can have a wizard out of unbind to make sure you get that spell off if it's that important.
Every single time I played, like, so many people have lost a game against me because they've gone, I desperately need to get this teleport spell off, I desperately need to get this off, and they haven't checked the range to see whether they're in range of the Incantor, and they go, first turn, teleport spell, they go, right, I've got the teleport spell off, and I'm like, cool, just spell it with the Incantor.
Got it off on
like,
13.
Are you, like, are you in range? And I'm like, auto just spell 30 inches. Like, you didn't need to be in range. You could have just been, you could have baselined that and teleported the unit wherever you needed to go. But it's just, always check your ranges. Like,
particularly if you're playing an army that can redeploy after the fact. Like, if you've got anything that like can set up again, and like the sort of the Bone Splitters type teleport,
or the Slaves to Darkness spell,
Slaves to Darkness spell, stuff like that. You can buff first, then move. So sequencing is important, but I mean, spells, they're really important to protect your big guys, whether that's debuffs or buffs. But make sure you're in range of the thing you need, and and don't put yourself in unbind range if you don't have to be. Is probably the advice. And if you don't get it off, don't play like it's on.
Be willing to change your plan. Keep your big guy alive. That's what we're here for.
exactly. Don't just push it to the middle of the table, like Russ said with Allarelle.
It's like,
all right, I didn't
sorry,
get this
Laurie.
off. I'm just going to push it to the middle of the table anyway.
Yeah,
Laurie.
yeah, Laurie.
Yeah.
No. It's like, oh, I didn't quite get many spells off. My Frost Heart Phoenix doesn't have all the bonus save. Oh, I'll just chuck it anyway because that's what I do every game. So, oh, it's dead. Oh dear. But yeah, I think protect the big guys. It's quite an interesting topic because I know a lot of people. I think as well, like people, they are not. I find a lot of people think monsters are something you can like push around with impunity, and I think because you've got so many points in one thing, they're obviously more of a finesse piece than what people give them credit for.
I think they're in like two separate categories, aren't they? They're either like a lot of people go, these are a liability. I do not put them in my army because it's a massive like investment of points and it could die, or people just go like it's unkillable and just push it around. And like there's like Russell, it's like there's that middle ground which I think where they actually sit, where like played well they're brilliant, played poorly they're rubbish.
Protect your big dudes. Be mindful of ranges. That is it.
Always use protection. That's what I say. So
on that bombshell.
I think that'll wrap it up for today's show. So if you've got any questions or comments on monsters or any tips and tricks or any armies you play that you struggle with, you can put it in the comments below, and we do read them and check them periodically. So
or slide into our Discord and like let us know, and we can go in there. So
yeah, we won't mock you too much if you lose your Mawcrusha on turn 1 because we've all been there. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll be back again tomorrow.
Guys. Bye.
Cheers, guys.